Good afternoon and welcome to today's program, titled The Body Conversation. I'm Gary Enos, editor for the Institute for the Advancement of Behavioral Healthcare. Today's program is sponsored by Foundations Recovery Network. Thank you to our sponsor and to our audience for giving us your time and attention today. Before we get started, we have a few details we'd like to go over. To submit a question for our presenter, please use the Q&A area below the slides at any time. You do not have to wait until the end of the program to ask a question. If you are having technical issues, please click the link. Please click the Test Your Connection button below the video window to chat with support. And finally, to download a copy of the presentation, please click the link in the Resources tab to the right of your slides. I have a special note about CE credit. To get your CE, you must watch the program all the way through the Q&A section at the end of the presentation. At the end, do not leave the web page. The site will automatically redirect you to a survey. This must be completed in order to generate your CE certificate. And for those watching in a group, please download the group submission guide in the Resources tab and follow the instructions provided. Please note that CE credit is not available for the archived webinar. It is only available for the live event on December 11th, 2018. And finally, for those of you who tweet, please tweet along with us using the hashtag IABHCLiveWebinar. At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Robin Cruz. With a master's degree in solo performance from the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland, Robin utilizes her skills across the United States to inspire and motivate others. Robin is a national recovery advocate for Eating Recovery Center, and she also contributes to numerous publications, such as Refinery 29, Yahoo Style, Psychology Today, and The Mighty. Robin is the co-author of Making Peace with Your Plate and the author of the children's affirmation book, Lovely Dreams. Thank you, Robin, for taking the time to speak with us today. And with that, the audience is yours.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, everybody. I'm just going to assume that you can hear me very clearly. It's always very weird when I first start a webinar because I can't see you, and I would love to see you, but maybe at another conference in 2019. Today, due to time restraints, I'm really going to give you more of an overview of the body conversation and how you can utilize that. This body conversation was first outlined as the nutritional healing approach in Making Peace with Your Plate and is now referred to the body conversation. Today, our objectives are going to be as follows. We're going to give an overview of what a healthy relationship with your body and the food you put in it looks like. We're going to list 3 phases of the nutritional healing, the body conversation. And we're going to identify when an unhealthy relationship with the body and the food becomes an eating disorder. So, what is the body conversation? It's really interesting here. You know, each time I create a new presentation, I first go to this part of the discovery process when I'm presenting. I first think of things and I write it all out, and it never ceases to amaze me of how fancy and profound I try to be. But actually, the body conversation is really a simple concept. It's just really super hard for people because, you know, we have a relationship with food, and society really gets in the way of how we should be treating food. So it feels very complicated, but it really is very simple because our body is such an intuitive and intelligent thing that when we begin to listen to it and respond to it and connect to it, we really can tap into what our body can offer us. It's just trying to get past the noise. So hopefully we'll go over a little bit of that today. But the body conversation, I like to think of it as an analogy, right? let's take my marriage. Bear with me here. So I've been in a marriage for 15 years, and I love my husband, but sometimes I find myself getting into kind of stuck in my relationship with him. I begin to get resentful, and I begin to get annoyed. He's not doing what I want him to do. He's not acting the way I want him to be, and I start getting super resentful. And I start trying to impose what I believe that he should be, and it becomes friction in our relationship. And then maybe one day when I've finished cussing him out, he may say, "Hey, Rob, it's time to go to Daniela." And Daniela, right, she's our couples therapist. And so I resentfully go off to our couples therapy. But in Daniela's office, and bear with me here, in Daniela's office, it becomes this incredibly safe place. We're on our best behavior because we're in front of Daniela, right? And we're in this safe place. And then when I'm in this safe place and Tim, my husband, starts speaking to me about his feelings, because I feel safe, I can begin to really listen to Tim and listen to how he's feeling. And as I'm listening to him, I naturally begin to connect with him and what he's saying. And then through the connection with Tim, I get to respond to him from a place of love. And that's really what it means to have a body conversation. We need to begin to listen, connect, and respond to our body and what it is saying to us. But of course, there are so many things that will get in our way. Some of the obstacles that get in our way is, as you know, is the culture, family. And when I say family, I mean, my mother got her relationship with her food in the body from her mother, who got her relationship with the food in the body from her family. And with my mother, she had a great relationship, mostly with her body, but the language that she gave to her children were things like, my dad would create a English roast with Yorkshire pudding, and it would be the most delicious of food. And then when my mum would finish eating it, she would hold her stomach and she would say, "Oh, I shouldn't have eaten that." And so that idea that food has taken away something, has built an obstacle to the way that I should look or be in society, becomes difficult to navigate. And then we have media, which is really self-explanatory. And then if you put on the top that we have had an addiction to substance use, in that substance use we're taught that we can't trust ourselves, right? And rightfully so. Look, in our substance use we have done many, many things that have caused consequences and have grinded against our value. And so we do feel like that we can't be trusted, but that model of not being trusted then can penetrate through to the walls of the food and the way that we think of the bodies. And then we have the food debate, and not to mention the need to fit in. But when we come to the food debate, it becomes really, it's a difficult one, because I want to really validate this food debate, and we hear this a lot in the substance world, the addiction world, because we talk about food in a way of being an addiction, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But we have the two sides of the debate, right? We have the food is medicine debate, that food impacts our body and our mood, and I can't see you all, but I would suggest that many of you would believe that, right? Food is medicine and food is mood. I want to give you an example. When my mum was diagnosed with lupus and she ate foods that were nightshade group, like peppers and potatoes, anything that was underground, when she ate those, her body flared up and she could hardly walk or move her hands. So let's say food is medicine, food is mood. That is true. And then we have the other side of the debate that says removing food groups or defining foods as either good or bad make way for disordered behavior. We know that in the eating disorder community, when we start to restrict food or label them as good or bad, then we, in many of our population, are created disordered eating. So that too is absolutely true and is equally true as food is medicine and food is mood, right? So we have these two fighting debates, two ideas. But what I'm suggesting today, I'm not arguing that one argument is more valid than the other. I'm saying that actually maybe we're looking at it the wrong way. Because both of them are equally true, we want to get our clients to a place of optimum health. That's our main goal for both of these debates, right? We want optimum health. I'm saying that we're starting the wrong place. We can't start by restricting food. We can't start at optimization and be, I'm trying to make this very clear because I can't see you. We can't start at a place where we're saying there is no good or bad food, because what it does is it builds up restriction, and we can't sustain any ongoing kind of health regime or behavior regime when we start with restriction. So I'm saying that why don't we start at the bottom where we build a foundation where we have a relationship with our body and our food that we put in it, and through that relationship we become mindful of our body, and then from there we can put in into place changes that actually can have sustaining recovery and optimal health. So there are three phases to the body conversation. The first one is listen, connect, and respond. Again, a very simple process, but we complicate it because we have so many beliefs about what our body should look like and what kind of food we should be eating. The structured approach, which is listening, so the structured approach, thinking of Danielle as my marriage counselor's office, consists of 6 things: the time and portions, the variety in grains, fruits, vegetables, proteins, and fats, removing no good or bad foods, letting go of what we think we know and understand about our body and the food, and when we ask questions, can you hear the body signals? This is an approach that we recommend for a year. Now, if you look really carefully in the diagram, you're going to be able to see many different things that you wouldn't typically see in a pyramid. So you'll be able to see a cupcake in the grains, you'll be able to see ice cream in the protein, you'll be able to see French fries in the vegetables because potato is technically a vegetable, and you can see pizza also in the grains. This is a really triggering thing for many of us and many of our clients at Eating Recovery Center. But the reason why we put it there is that we want to start to experiment. Again, being mindful that we let go of what we think we know about food. When we're taking into consideration our portions, So if you want to think about like a 10-inch plate and it looks like a making peace sign, the majority of it is fruit and veg. Dairy is one part and protein. It's incorporated in the protein, and grains is the other part. When you start eating from this kind of place, incorporating a cupcake instead of a piece of toast, or having some ice cream or French fries within your vegetables, when you have a safety net that we often find in our portions, this sets us up to explore. So in our eating disorder patients, or patients that you will see, clients that you will see in your programs that tend to have a restrictive tendency, say, let's look at our protein. They may pick a broiled piece of chicken. But then say somebody that tends to overeat on their feelings, they may pick in their protein a fried piece of chicken. And we're saying at this point in time of the structured approach, it is the same value. And I'll tell you why that happens. If we're dealing from a restrictive point of view and we pick a broiled piece of chicken, we're going to feel in control. However, we're also feeding our brain enough protein so that it can begin to change behaviors. Both are valuable. If somebody is picking a fried piece of chicken because they tend to be, say, a compulsive overeater, they're going to feel like their needs are met and they're not being restricted because they're eating a fried piece of chicken. But they're also going to have boundaries because it's a certain portion. And so we're really dealing with fears, pushing our fears, challenging our fears in this section so that we can begin to have a relationship, so that we're not triggered by our food choices. We have that safety net of the portion control. I hope that makes sense. I want to talk a little bit of why the abstinence space that we often see in our 12-step philosophy versus the incorporation of foods that we just saw in our structured approach from the beginning to listen to our body. So with the abstinence base, the reason why the majority of the eating disorder population and the professionals there will focus on building a relationship with their body and the foods that they put in it, incorporating foods, is because when we restrict food, we will trigger what is called hedonic cues. I'm going to go ahead and talk to you about what hedonic cues are, just in case somebody doesn't know what that is. So Dr. Friedman, who is our vice president of our binge eating program, she talks about when we restrict foods, we build hedonic cues, which are visual and emotional cues to food. So we set them off when we restrict that food. So, for example, if we say pizza is bad, I binge on pizza, I'm addicted to pizza, I can't have pizza, I am now setting off, and then I go the extra length of I'm not eating pizza, I'm never eating pizza, right? I'm now setting off hedonic cues where all I can think about is pizza, the cheese and what I'm going to put on it, the bread, the crunchiness, my mouth starts salivating, I begin obsessing over it. So I've now set off the hedonic cues because I feel triggered, because I have said that I can't have that pizza. We have, just say we have 100 people that come to the binge eating program at ERC. 20% of those are actually very capable of not incorporating their trigger foods, right? So some people will come to us and they'll be very much like, sugar is addictive. I can't eat it. I have to stay away from it. 20% of those people will succeed on not incorporating their foods. But the 80% of people will not. It will trigger a binge. And so I really want to focus on the 80% of people, because here's the deal. Whatever works for people in building their relationship with food and their body works for them. We don't want to change their mind, right? The ultimate goal here is to make sure that we're setting our clients up for their best case scenario, their best life scenario, I should say, their best life. So what we want to do is we want to incorporate the trigger foods in the non-emotional, non-judgmental, deliberating public manner, meaning we want to start eating foods that kind of trigger us in a safe environment. Our focus is to reduce hedonic cues and focus on abstinence from behavior around trigger foods rather than abstinence from foods. I do want to just quickly say for a minute here, talk about this concept of addiction to food. And again, I am not here to make you change your mind. Harvard Food Scale talks about this a lot. And I think if you get my presentation, you'll actually see the source. Talks about us. Now, I want to be super clear here, so I'll tell you what they say, and then I want to give you a little bit of backstory on that. So Harvard Food Scale talks about us having an addiction to behavior rather than to the food. But what I really want to say, in my time, I've had 3 years of being a social media host to our binge eating community. And in my time of engaging with this community, I really do want to say that although that's what the studies say, people truly, truly believe that they have an addiction to food. And this is where I really start to believe it has the same sensation for them as it does with somebody with alcohol. But what the studies show is that we are not really addicted to sugar in its purest form. Nobody goes around eating handfuls of sugar. It's that combination of foods and the emotional relationship to that. And so there are things that we work on to really help that client surf those urges of the triggering foods. I'm not sure if many of you have heard what urge surfing is, but I really love this technique. So when people are triggered with behaviors, I'm going to read you a quote from a great friend and dietitian, registered dietitian of mine, Jean Curran. She says, urge surfing is like watching waves roll onto shore. The waves can be big and powerful, and sometimes they're more low and gentle. But the waves always crest and then fall, and its power dissipates as it rolls onto the sand. This same is true of urges. They have natural arcs. They build, crest, and subside. Urge surfing allows people to wait long enough to watch the wave or ride the wave, and it gives the urge time to go away on its own without acting on it. The idea here is that each time we immediately act on an urge, we reinforce the behavior. I have an urge, I act on the urge, I get immediate reward, relief from the behavior. When we postpone acting on the urge, like urge surfing, we begin to break the urge behavior reward repeat cycle. So once we start responding to the urge differently, we start to think, believe we can delay, wait out the urge. The more we postpone acting on the urges, the more confident we feel sitting with the urge. And slowly our brain chemistry starts to change as our behaviors and thinking start to change. So here's what we do in our urges. Now, I hope I can do this correctly. We rate the urge to engage. So, for example, say you have a client, or you could do this with yourself. You have a client, you just say a client comes to you and they want to, and you know, this actually can work with substance use as well, but let's just talk about food. So we can rate the urge. So just say a client comes to you and says, I am really wanting to binge. I just can't stop fixating on cupcakes, right? Maybe they had a cupcake in their meal. And so you'll ask the client to say, so just say it's Harry. Hey, Harry, between 1 to 10, what is that rate? And Harry will say, it's about an 8. And so you'll acknowledge and validate that urge. Harry, I really can hear you. You sound very frustrated and triggered at the moment. I really want to validate that you're feeling a compulsion towards wanting to eat those cupcakes. So you're validating it. And then you'll put in place a distraction-valued activity. I know Harry loves to play hockey, right? So I say to Harry, hey, Harry, let's go out and let's go watch some hockey together, right? So Harry goes and we watch some hockey, right? Or Harry goes out by himself and he watches that hockey. And then he comes back and we want to revisit the urge, right? So I say, Harry, how does your urge feel now? And Harry might say, it's come down a little bit. It's at 6. So I say, that's great, Harry. Why don't you go off and finish watching what you're watching? So Harry goes off and he finishes watching what he's watching, right? And he comes back. We're postponing that, all while we're postponing the behavior. Harry is not binging on those cupcakes, right? He comes back and he has decreased again. But just say Harry has not, ends up binging anyway. So later that night he goes and binges. The point is that Harry did not compulsively go. Once you had the urge, the initial urge, he did not compulsively go and pick up that cupcake. Harry was able to put time in between it. And in that time, he has changed his behavior and he's changed his thinking and he's changed his sociology. And so his urges are, he's changing his mindset and he's changing his urges. He now knows that he can intervene. And that's really the point of the urge surfing. So our second phase is the mindful approach. In our mindful approach, we're really going to, it's a really add-on to the structured approach, the listening. This is where, when we're learning, when we are starting to listen to our body and we're now starting to connect with it. So we want to go a little bit deeper to just eating in that structured approach. And by the way, the structured approach has not just to do with portion, it's also to do with that we want to regularly set our client up to eat 3 meals a day with 2 snacks in between. So when we begin to get mindful, we're going to start to notice our cravings. What are we craving? You know, I use this approach with our girls. I've used this approach. I have 2 daughters, and my husband and I use this approach with our girls ever since that they were eating and could understand what we were saying. So when my girls say to me, Mom, I'm hungry, I don't know what to eat, I'll say, okay, let's take a minute. What are you craving? Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it sweet? Is it sour? Is it mushy? Is it crunchy? What flavors of food do you like? Is it spicy? And so then we begin to move away. So we don't focus on the good or bad foods, right? So we're just focusing on what it tastes like. We're trying to connect with our body. What do you feel like, buddy? What do you want to eat, right? And we can do this with our with our clients and indeed ourselves. So we're allowing our body, we have our safety net, right, of the structured approach. So we're starting on that. We know that we have the portion size. We know we have our times. We know that we need protein, grains, fruit, and vegetables, and our fats. We know that that's what we have to work with. But with that, what do we feel like? So we can start to explore those trigger foods a bit more. We can start to explore, really, if I do eat that one piece, that one portion at lunch, is it really going to make me the size of a house, right? So we're starting to really explore. We're starting to really connect with our body. But I want to be really clear here. If these are the only two phases that you ever do with yourself or your clients, this creates a really great, solid relationship with your body and the food that you put in it. This self-care approach, I have to tell you and be completely honest here, I didn't start this approach until at least 10 years in my recovery, and I've only recently started to really commit to it. It really is an approach in a nutshell, just a time base. I'm going to say it really is about, now that I know that I can eat when I'm hungry, I can stop when I'm full, I can trust my body, what do I need to eat for optimum health? And again, some people may never get here, but this is really something that I know. I trust my body. I know that if I eat something, it's not going to make me the size of a house. I know I'm not going to go into restriction. I know that I can honor my body. But hey, I also know that as I age, things start reacting differently to my body. So for example, I know that I have high cholesterol. Now that I have a relationship with my body, though, I can implement things for optimum health, not feeling deprived. So that's where I start to be putting in things for optimum health. I know that maybe I need to eat a little bit less dairy to bring down my LDL, right? I know that maybe too much sugar exhausts me too early on in the day. And so I can start incorporating things, and I can start incorporating them and sustain them because I don't have any emotional attachment to them. But what happens, or just before I go on, I want to be clear that I've just gone through 3 phases that are really quite hefty subjects, even though they're simple. Please, if you feel that you have any questions around those approaches, you can either buy the book, Making Peace with Your Plate, or you can email me any questions that you have. And I know that Gary and Ian will go through that later. But I do want to be very mindful and acknowledge them that I have just given you overviews on 3 kind of very cool phases that do need a lot of attention, and you will have a lot of questions, I'm sure. So what happens, though, when unhealthy relationship with our body and the food that we put in it becomes an eating disorder? How do we actually know? So being aware that this is a substance use population, many of you treat substance use clients, I want to go through a couple of the statistics just so that you know what we're dealing with the co-occurrence of substance use and eating disorders. 50% of people with eating disorders will be susceptible to substance use. 50%. That's a huge thing. Now, 35% of the population, the substance use population that you treat, will also be susceptible to an eating disorder. The lifetime rates of a person with substance use with the various eating disorders are as follow. Anorexia nervosa is 27%, so 27% of your population will have anorexia nervosa. 37% will have bulimia nervosa, and 35% will have binge eating disorders. Women with anorexia are 19 times more likely to die from substance use. Approximately 57% of males with binge eating disorder will experience substance use disorder. And this is a fascinating stat. individuals who undergo bariatric surgery are at risk for developing substance use disorder. And then as an additional, I'm really focusing on binge eating disorder because binge eating comes with the bulimia nervosa, and binge eating and bulimia nervosa are the highest co-occurring eating disorders with substance use disorder. So the rest of the presentation is really going to be focused on those. Binge eating disorder, we're going to refer to as BED, eating disorder, affecting anywhere from 2.6 to 5.5% of the population. So that's 8.7 million people. 50% of those with BED are living in a higher weight body. 70% of those in Overeaters Anonymous will meet criteria for BED, and 35% of those in weight management programs meet the criteria for binge eating disorder. I'm just going to go over very quickly what these disorders are, what the criteria are in the DSM-5. So to be diagnosed with binge eating disorder, you have to have 1 episode per week of binge eating for up to 3 months. And binging is eating significantly more food in a short period of time than most people would eat in similar circumstances. And it's marked, this is most important here, that when people are struggling with binge eating disorder, their behavior is marked with a feeling of loss of control. For bulimia nervosa, you have to do compensatory behavior for at least a week for up to 3 months. So bulimia comes with a recurrent episode of binge eating, and the compensatory behaviors such as self-induced vomiting, misuse of laxatives, diuretics, other medications, fasting, and then binging, and excessive exercise. Night eating syndrome is something that we hear a lot about. It's a little bit different from night eating. So night eating syndrome is where we will eat at least 25% of food intake after our evening meals. We will see this a lot within our community. People will talk about night eating. It is very difficult for them, but it most commonly will occur because they have restricted or dieted throughout the day, and then at night their body is so extremely hungry that they end up binging. Some of these people will also find themselves in the morning. Night eating syndrome is when they will eat in the middle of the night, and they will wake up and have no recollection of that, but will find wrappers and food crumbs all over them. And this disordered pattern of eating has to be maintained by at least 3 months to meet the criteria in the DSM-5. And then compulsive overeating in OSFED is at least 2 episodes per time of day. So when you look at breakfast, lunch, and dinner and snacks in between, people with compulsive overeating in OSFED, other specified feeding and eating disorders is what OSFED stands for. People with that will eat at least 2 times during the same. So at meals, so let's say at dinner, they eat dinner twice or more. So why sometimes, so I speak to a lot of substance use professionals, and they will talk about how they can't find that patient who has the co-occurring. And it's not because it might not be because of anything that you've done. It's just that maybe the client doesn't know yet. Maybe, you don't start finding out until, say, maybe a month into their recovery process, and then all of a sudden their pants are getting tighter and they put the brakes on their substance use recovery process. Maybe it's because their eating disorder goes undetected by their treatment team because we don't recognize the red flags. That's pretty common. There are some behaviors that I want to quickly go through that you can look for in your clients. And because my screen is blurry, I'm just going to quickly find that on my hard copy of my presentation. One moment. So behaviors that may indicate that your client has an eating disorder are the following: consistently leaving the tables within 10 minutes after eating a meal, stirring or playing with food rather than eating, skipping meals consistently, skipping a meal then overeating at another meal, consistently tired or fatigued, consistently setting and communicating goals around getting physically healthy, exercising despite physical injuries, exercising more than 1.5 hours a day, more than 4 to 5 days a week, restricting food or food groups, talking about particular foods as good or bad, expressing concerns about being or becoming fat, gaining weight in treatment, and an inordinate amount of conversation about food, weight, the body, and the calorie intake. I will say before I go on with these next ones, listen, again, let's be really clear. We live in a crappy kind of culture when it comes to our body and the food. And so any one of those things that I have just spoken about may not indicate that they have an eating disorder. It's just really a gentle red flag that has you become curious with your client. Go through that and talk to them. I'll give you an assessment in a moment that you can start to really review, but don't assume that your client has an eating disorder if they have one of those red flags. Here's some additional behavior red flags: rigid eating patterns, food sneaking behaviors such as secretive eating alone in a car or after others have gone to bed, use of a large quantity of artificial sweetness and low-calorie beverages. Between 26 to 67% of individuals with eating disorders use laxatives for weight control. So approximately 52% of those with anorexia and 45% of those with bulimia are regular smokers. Regular smoking and caffeine disorders are the most prevalent substance use disorders found in women with eating disorders. Approximately 26% of those with anorexia and 23% of those with bulimia will meet the criteria of caffeine disorder. There's language to look for, but because of time, I'm not going to be able to go through that. You will have these presentations, so please go through it and be very mindful of the language to look for. There really is a great indicator. Here's a SCOFF questionnaire on a very short questionnaire that you can talk to your clients. So if you see some red flags within their behavior and their language, there's 5 simple questions that you can ask your clients, or you can do a much thorough questionnaire at www.eat-26.com. You'll find that below. There's a link below that you can find on when you download that presentation. But the questions are: do you make yourself sick because you feel uncomfortably full? Do you worry that you have lost control over how much you eat? Have you recently lost more than 1 stone, which is 14 pounds, in a 3-month period? I will say here, it is not common if your client is struggling with bulimia nervosa or a binge eating disorder that they have put on 14 pounds within 1 month. So please be gentle. Do you believe yourself to be fat when others say you are too thin? And would you say that food dominates your life? There is a difference between being susceptible to and pressured by our culture to that of somebody who has an eating disorder. Somebody who has an eating disorder will wake up, and before even their eyes are open, they will be thinking about what food they ate, what food they'll be eating today, what exercise they did, how much exercise they have to compensate for the day before. They will deem themselves either good or bad for the amount of food that they did or did not eat. So there is a clear difference. If you do think that somebody that you are treating does have an eating disorder, use those flags again as a gentle flag. Do not assume again that your client has an eating disorder, and do a 24-hour food recall. If somebody wants to know more about that, please email me or ask that question. And please keep your personal opinions about food and body to yourself. As I said, we have very often our own relationship with body and our food that is kind of activated from our culture and our family and our own personal beliefs, that we don't want to put that onto our clients. What to say and what not to say, I'm going to leave you to go through this. And then there's treatment options. If you do have a client that is struggling with an eating disorder, here's what the treatment wants to look like. So I'm going to end on this. So just say that you have a client that you suspect has an eating disorder. If they're not purging around their clock and they're not restricting their food, studies show that it is a valid process to have your client finish a 30-day treatment for substance use disorder to create a solid foundation for that substance use. And then instead of sending your client either home or to an assisted living, then you send them to an eating disorder facility. And that is often, the best way where they can incorporate the tools that they've used from substance use and then pick up extra tools for their toolkit for their eating disorder, so that then when they go home, we're setting them up for long-term success instead of them going home and picking up another illness. And the approach, the nutritional model that is ideal for this population is disease management. We know that a lot of the people that come in with binge eating disorders have, diabetes, fatty liver issues. You want to be able to treat that with a medical model, special eating disorder treatment, and a mindful non-diet approach like we just set forth in the body conversation. And we want to teach our patients why loss of control of eating exists, what the binge eating brain is about. We want to address weight stigma. We want to address chronic stress because we know that triggers the use of food. We want to treat effective regulation of the negative effects. We want to regulate their emotions. We want to help them with their sleep, their nutrition, and their medical care, and also provide with psychological treatment, the IPT model, acceptance commitment therapy model, the DBT, dialectical behavior, and ERP model. And then the outcomes is reducing anxiety, physical improvement of physical and cognitive health, decreased eating disorder behavior, weight loss, and a lower BMI. It just happens. We do not focus on weight loss, but it does happen when you're addressing these issues and you're eating and building a relationship with your body and the food that you put in it. And overall, it's what we want is overall improved quality of life for our clients. I'm going to turn it over for question and answers. Thank you so much.
Robin, thank you very much for a very informative presentation. Folks, before we get into the Q&A portion today, I'm going to hand things over to Christy Chrisman from Foundations for a few words from our sponsors. Christy?
Thanks, Gary. Powered by Foundations Recovery Network, the Recovery Unscripted podcast shares firsthand stories and expert insights from the front lines of behavioral and mental health care, with new episodes each week featuring guests such as politician Chris Christie, best-selling author Sam Quinones, and former drug czar Michael Botticelli. Recovery Unscripted brings you exclusive conversations about issues that matter to you, so you can be better equipped to care for your patients, your colleagues, and yourself. Thank you so much, and back to you, Gary.
Thank you, Christy. We have had some questions that have come in from the audience. We want to remind everyone that you can still use the Q&A area below the slides to submit a question at any time. Also, to download a copy of the slides for today's presentation, please click the Resources tab to the right of the presentation window, and we will try to get through as many questions as we can in the remaining time that we have. Robin, there were a couple of people who did ask after you mentioned the 24-hour food recall. I'm wondering if you can define that for us and give some guidance in that area, please.
Yeah, great. That's a really great question. Thank you. So the 24-hour food recall is absolutely just that. With your client, you want them to write down every single thing that they ate within a 24 hours. And I want it to include the gum that they chew, the coffee that they drink, and even, so the coffee that they drink and the food that they drink. And so write out every single thing that they ate. That is going to give you a very clear indication of what their eating pattern is like. So, for example, you might see that your client drank black coffee up until noon, and then at, say, 8 o'clock at night, they ate cake. That's where the conversation comes in, right? First of all, we know that that's a typical sign of somebody struggling with binge. We know that the caffeine with somebody with an eating disorder is one of the most prominent substance use disorders that clients have. We know that now her body is starting to fail and she's over hungry at nighttime. And so that's your starting point to have a conversation. And when you have a conversation with your client, I just want to give you a heads up, again, we don't want to assume that they have an eating disorder. We don't want to provide personal opinion on that. When they say that they had a cake, it's room for you to just say, how much cake did you eat? Right? Now, somebody with bulimia or binge eating disorder may have actually eaten an entire cake. And so that's why we don't want any personal opinion. We want to assume that they ate the whole cake and not be surprised when they do. So we want to say, you ate cake. Did you eat the whole cake? Because that gives them the invitation of saying, what? I didn't eat the whole cake. Oh, my God, no. Or you want to reduce shame when you hear, yes, I ate the whole piece of cake. So the 24-hour food recall is just that, recalling all the food that they ate and liquids that they ate in a 24-hour period, getting a time frame of that, i.e. what time of day that they ate, and then starting the conversation from there. I hope that clarifies it.
That's excellent. Thank you. We had a question that came in regarding gender-related factors, and the question was, any difference in approach when treating a male versus a female when they are addressing an eating disorder?
That's a really great question. So there is no difference in the treatment. I will say a couple of things. First of all, what we will see in our client between different genders is slightly different in regards to their behavior. So we may see more focus on muscle than being thin. We may see more liquefying of foods. We may see an obsession for building muscle. I do have a free booklet that I created a while ago. Please feel free to email me for that free booklet. It is Recognizing Eating Disorders in the Substance Use Population, and it has a section on males, so you'll see the behaviors are slightly different. I will say also that the difference in the co-occurring issues that we tend to have with our males can be slightly different, but not always with our females. We see a lot of men with binge eating disorder also are addicted to things such as porn, sex, and gambling. But the treatment process is not different.
Great. Another question from our audience. I work in crisis counseling and am curious what would be some warning signs that someone needs hospitalization for an eating disorder. Any thoughts on that, Robin?
Yeah, I think that warrants a much more professional response than I can give you at this time. I would like to talk to Dr. Mailer about that. There are some medical things that we do need to look out for. We will know, so we know potassium. Those that purge regularly are in danger of having lower amounts of potassium in their body and electrolytes. These are life-threatening issues. I would like to get that information to you. I'm not sure how to best do that, Gary. If you want me to leave my email here, or I'm not sure how we best do that, but I really would like to get that information to you because that's a great question, and I think it's worthy of a more in-depth response.
And you can feel free to share, contact information that you're comfortable with sharing with the audience. That's fine.
So it's Robin, ROBYN, Cruz, CRUZE, at eatingrecovery.com.
Excellent. This is an interesting question that might apply to just about everyone in the audience. The person asks, can the presenter recommend any specific training for eating disorders that we would be able to send staff in order to get additional training? So, for instance, for someone in a program, a facility or program that deals mainly with substance use disorders or mental health, what would be maybe some training options or specifics that you would point to that might be able to assist their staff in being more adept in this area?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. So if you're talking about being training a clinician to be an eating disorder specialist, there's what's called the Certified Eating Disorder training that the IADEP organization do. But if you're talking about general awareness to recognize and to be able to identify, to learn more about some of the modalities that we treat eating disorders with, speaking of like acceptance and commitment therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, some of the therapies that I kind of spoke about just briefly in the presentation. Eating Recovery Center have a special university that is free. They have, and I think you will see in these resources, you can see My ERC portal. That's going to give you access to a lot of the education that you will be looking for. And I believe that is up on your screen.
And then lastly, before we wrap up, just real quickly, going back to the 24-hour food recall, one of our participants asked if you would recommend also the use of a daily food journal, or is the 24-hour recall sufficient?
So, that's more of a clinical thing, but what I would tell you that our clinicians would say, their journals are tricky. It's like us giving approval of us kind of obsessing over food, kind of like it's very triggering for our clients to often use food journals. And so I would say do the 24-hour food recall with your client because you're the safety net, right? You're the one, so they can feel safe. They don't have to. Some clients are going to be worried to tell you everything they've eaten. Some people that are struggling with anorexia nervosa will feel very proud of the fact that they're not eating very much. And so we really want to, where possible, do it with the client. I hope that helps. I wonder if anyone is there.
We do have some final instructions now. I'm sorry about that. We do have some final instructions regarding CE credit, and we're going to go to that. So again, to our audience, do not leave this page. Please continue to stay on the platform. The site will automatically redirect you to a survey. This must be completed in order to generate your CE certificate. For those watching in a group, as a reminder, please download the group submission guide in the Resources tab to the right of the slides and follow the instructions provided. Please note again that CE credit is not available for the archived webinar. It is only available for the live event on December 11th. I want to again thank Robin Cruz for an excellent presentation. I also would like to thank our sponsors, Foundations Recovery Network, for making today's program possible. Finally, thank you to you and our audience for participating today. We hope you will join us in the future for another IABHC webinar. This concludes today's presentation.